Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. Before we begin, I'd recommend if you could just change your view to speaker view. And for the most part, we will be speaking directly to you and not doing a ton of slides, so that will give you the best view. But to kick things off, I will introduce myself. I'm Maria Vera Whalen. I'm the VP of Community Service for the Yale Club of DC, and so glad that you all were able to join us this evening, for an event that's about a really important topic, especially in our region and especially in light of the current pandemic, food insecurity in the DC metro area. Tonight, we're really excited to welcome some very special guests to share their expertise on this topic and to have a really interesting discussion and answer some of your questions. As a little bit of a background here, over the past couple of months, as many of you may be aware, the Yale Club of DC has been hosting a fundraiser to benefit the Capital Area Food Bank in light of COVID. And the response from you all and from our community here has been really amazing. So just a quick thank you to all of you who have contributed. And if you're interested in learning more or considering a donation, feel free to check out the link in the chat box, and we'll share it again throughout the webinar. We encourage you to take a look. We hope that tonight's presentations and the discussion that our speakers share with us will shed light on the important issues of hunger and inspire all of us to try to make positive changes. And just to preview kind of how this event will run, we're going to start with some brief opening remarks from the Capital Area Food Bank team. Then we'll have a panel discussion with the team as well as other experts on the topic. And then you'll have a chance to submit questions for the panel to answer. So I encourage you to feel free to chat your questions to me anytime throughout the event in the chat box. And we'll be sure to review those when, as time allows, we will answer them during the panel discussion. So just to reiterate that, feel free to just hit the chat button, and in the to area, you would select Maria Vera Whalen, and you can just chat me your questions there. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. To kick us off, I'd like to welcome Peter Schnall. Peter's the chair of the board at Capital Area Food Bank, a Yale College alum, class of '86, and most importantly, he was in JE, as was I, which is clearly the most important thing to know about Peter. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Maria. This event is going to be great. I really appreciate it, and thanks for putting it together. So we really appreciate that the DC Yale Club chose the food bank to be the beneficiary of its first ever fundraising project. I'm told you all have already raised $12,445. Thank you for that. And as Maria said, if you would like to help out the club to reach its $15,000 goal, you can click the link, which will show up from time to time in the chat box. My job this evening is to introduce the food bank and to introduce the food bank's CEO. The Capital Area Food Bank is the largest hunger fighting organization serving the Washington, D.C. metro area. We distribute over 31 million meals each year, mostly through a network of 450 community partners. When people think about local hunger fighting, they usually picture one of our partners. You might picture a room stocked with food, half of which probably came from the food bank. Some volunteers may be handing it out, and a line of clients waiting their turn. Most people, when they picture local hunger fighting, don't picture the supply chain. That's where we come in. So if you visit our main facility, you'll see a fleet of trucks, a 90,000 square foot warehouse, which we've just supplemented with another 60,000 square feet in Montgomery County, pallets stacked in 5 high racks up to the ceiling, and forklifts driving through the aisles. We receive donations and purchases by the truckload, and with the help of over 20,000 volunteers, we sort and repack food into cases for distribution. So when a community needs help beyond the capacity of our partners, we set up our own pop-up markets and distribution sites to make sure food gets to the people who need it most. So I like to think of us as we're the scale in what would otherwise be a profoundly subscale emergency feeding system. And while distributing food is at the center of what we do, it's not all of what we do. Our ultimate goal is to help our clients improve their lives. And to that end, our network includes health and jobs organizations, among others, that connect our clients to a full range of needed services. Obviously, much of our operation has had to adapt to COVID, and you'll hear more about that from the panel. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Radha Muthaya, who will be our lead panelist and the food bank CEO. Radha joined the food bank as CEO about 2.5 years ago. Immediately prior, she was the CEO of the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, which she took from startup to high-impact global organization. Radha has held senior roles in both the private and NGO sector. She served CARE International, ICF International, the American Red Cross, Mercer Management Consulting, where we almost overlapped, and the Council on Foreign Relations. She's a BA and MA from Tufts, an MBA from Stanford, and is a Yale parent with a son in the class of 2022. I've worked with many CEOs over my career, and Radha's combination of passion and vision and management skill is unparalleled. That, plus her wide experience, makes her the perfect leader for today's crisis, and I am thankful every day for it. I think you'll really enjoy hearing from Radha. So with that, we'll begin. We're going to start off with a short video, and then we'll hear from Radha and the rest of our panel. So back to you, Maria, for the video.
How do we measure our region's progress? In new businesses? Better infrastructure? More restaurants? What if those things don't tell the whole story? Our region has some of the greatest wealth and influence in the country. But in the middle of that, hunger is living in over 400,000 homes right nearby. It's robbing thousands of people of their potential. That's a big problem all on its own. But it also makes other big problems even worse. Like the fact that some parts of our region have an unemployment rate 5 times the national average, and an infant mortality rate on par with some developing countries. If you're a 10-year-old growing up in some of the lowest income neighborhoods in our area, your life expectancy could be 30 years lower than another child living just 10 miles away. Not exactly what we'd call progress, right? But what if something better is possible? What if that 10-year-old was getting the good food she needed right from the beginning, allowing her to stay healthy, concentrate, and achieve in school? What if her parents had the energy they needed so they could support her as she grew? What if food was a built-in part of other services, like literacy, health screenings, and job training, that helped put her on a path to a longer life expectancy and a lifetime of success? It turns out something better is possible, and together we have the power to make it happen. For 4 decades, the Capital Area Food Bank has been at the center of our community's response to hunger, providing food to more than 450 nonprofit organizations. And today, we're also working with new kinds of partners in health, employment, education, and beyond. Pairing food with services that address hunger's root causes. With your help, we'll provide the meals that create paths for thousands of brighter, healthier futures. It's time to expand how we measure progress. And now, for her, for him, and for all of us, it's time to make it.
Thank you for sharing that video, Maria. And Peter, thank you for your opening remarks and kind words. And thank you for describing a little bit the difference of Food Bank and some of our food pantry partners who we often get confused with. And that video, it's been a while since I've seen it. It feels like the last few months have been a few years, even though that video was only released, in last fall. it still all rings true, and probably in a much more dire way today than ever before, as we look at the widening income gaps and the barriers that are rising to be that prevent people from really being a part of the growth that has occurred in our community and can occur, we hope, in the years to come, as we recover and rebuild from COVID. But let me start back by sort of picking up where Peter left off and talking a little bit about the food bank, how we get our food and how it all works. And it's really great to have Chris Bradshaw here with us, in addition to members of my team, so that we're able to show you kind of the full spectrum, of what we offer and what other important partners like Dreaming Out Loud can offer in the community, and how we work together to be able to make it all happen. In terms of the food bank, we receive, we're like a bank in the sense that we have deposits. We have food that we procure, food that is provided to us from the government, large food drives, etc. So different ways that we get our food. And then we assemble that in various different ways, whether it's into boxes, bags, or in pallets. And then that food goes out to our 450 partners, as you heard on the video, in addition to many other sites where we have direct distribution. So just to provide some statistics, we serve about 400,000 food insecure individuals across the DMV. So, and this was a pre-COVID number. I'll share with you kind of where we are today. But that cuts across all of the 8 wards in the District of Columbia, Prince George's and Montgomery County in Maryland, and then Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, Prince William, and Manassas in Northern Virginia. So that is our service region, and that's where pre-COVID they were roughly speaking about 400,000 food insecure individuals. We provide the food through a network of partners. About 2/3 of the food that we receive to be able to distribute is donated to us typically, and it comes from area retailers. So think of your favorite grocery store. They're probably a big contributor to the food bank, and we've really valued those partnerships that have been built up over the last 4 decades. Then another 20% of the food that we receive is USDA food. So it's targeted to specific populations. It could be for seniors, could be for children's after-school meals, those who fall within a certain income range, if you will. And then the additional food, which is just under 20%, we purchase. So thanks to donations from people like yourselves, from companies, from foundations, that allows us to be able to purchase the remainder of the food that we then distribute throughout our partners and into the community. So that's a little bit of how we get our food and where we get our food from. We distribute just over half of our food through partners, actually closer to 60%, and then the remainder are through these direct distribution. So things that you might see that look like farmers markets, community markets, except they're all free, and those are provided to those in need. And we've got 300 of these direct distribution points across our region. And in terms of who we provide food to, it's a wide range of people. There isn't a single profile that dominates, the food insecure individual, if you will, in our area. There are multiple. So we have, those who are seniors, those who are young kids, working families, where parents are working multiple jobs and just struggling to be able to make ends meet. And given the rising costs of living in this area, they need some additional help, and therefore they come and get usually 3 to 5 days worth, 3 to 5 days a month worth of their food from the food bank and its partners. So that's a little bit of who we provide food to. There isn't a single zip code that doesn't have a hungry person in our area. So despite what we might all think that, oh, Fairfax is really wealthy or Montgomery County is really wealthy, there are lots of hungry and food insecure people in all of these counties. So we say hunger doesn't discriminate in every single zip code in our area. Increasingly, we are seeing more and more grand families amongst those who we distribute food to. And grand families are those where grandparents are taking care of their grandkids full time. And so that is important for us to call out, because it's different types of food that we want to provide to those who are seniors versus, the young children that they may be supporting. And so we're starting to look, we have been looking at food that is appropriate for those families, where it's a combination of senior food, if you will, as well as good nutritious food for kids, for snacks and after school meals and things like that. We're also increasingly seeing a really high percentage of college students who are food insecure in our area. So whether they're in community college, they're in a four-year college, public or private institution, you name it, their levels of food insecurity are rising. And so that is another area that was relatively new for us in the last couple of years in terms of a new segment of the population that we're paying particular attention to in terms of how we can support them. Our larger food bank strategy has a two-pronged effort to it. One is to be able to meet the needs of those who are hungry today. They don't know where the next meal is going to come from. We and our partners aim to be there in their communities to provide food to them. So that has been the mission and mandate of the food bank since its inception, and that will continue to be as we move forward. In the last few years, we've added kind of a second area of focus, if you will, and that's really about food to enable brighter futures. And so you saw some of that in the video, and the idea is that we want to help people through food, that's our expertise, to be able to chart their own pathway through life, but to be able to help use food as that enabler that will allow them to become, to chart their own path and to become a little bit more sustainable, however they define that. And so we're very careful about using those words, however people choose to define, what they would like to do. We just want to be able to help remove some of those barriers for them. And we have seen that food can be an effective incentive when it's bundled with healthcare. It allows people, or it incentivizes people to go for wellness visits when they may not have had the time to do that before. But this encourages that. So we've got some programs for pregnant women where they are engaged, they haven't necessarily gone to all of their prenatal visits. They don't have their time. They're juggling multiple jobs. Transportation is expensive. But when they know that they might be able to get a couple bags of groceries, at that visit, and the food is tailored towards what they should be eating during their pregnancy, that is an effective incentive we're seeing, to be able to ensure that people do attend and go for those visits. So it's those types of things that we're doing more of, because we're looking at not just food security, but improving health outcomes, and bundling food with education for those who want to continue and don't have to make that choice between taking, an extra job to make $30 versus staying in the class that they enrolled in. So we want to make it so that we want to facilitate it so that they can actually have both of those if they choose to. So those are some of our Food Plus programming, we call it, to be able to support, healthier and better futures. And we do believe, as the video highlighted, that there's too much of a disparity within our previously, growing and thriving community here and economy. There's too much of a distinction between those who can participate and have a pathway for them to participate versus, versus those who are engaging today. And so that's a significant direction that the food bank is moving in, to use food to enable that engagement and to really look at those root causes of hunger in addition to just addressing hunger when it presents itself. So that's all pre-COVID, and we'll return to much of that programming, we hope, in the next 6 to 9 months. But certainly COVID has changed quite a bit of our operations, and we are also seeing, as a result of COVID and the economic downturn, how that number of 400,000 food insecure individuals is truly an old and low number. We just released a hunger report last week that Tim will take you through some of the highlights that really project that number for us now of food insecure individuals is looking to be something like 600,000 to 650,000 food insecure individuals. So that's a dramatic increase of, about 50% just in the last few months. And depending on what shape the recovery curve, is here in our region, we're going to live with those numbers for at least a year, if not a few years to come. So we have completely pivoted how we work, how we target. We do a lot of data analysis that allows us to have hunger heat maps that go down to the census tract level to really understand where the newly unemployed are and those who are likely to become food insecure as a result of their unemployment or as a result of the impact of COVID more directly on those communities. So we are focusing now on how are we supporting those immediate food needs with healthy needs, reaching those individuals, thinking innovatively about those who want to minimize their exposure and can't come out to usual distribution points, how we're getting food delivered to them. And really just with the support of many existing partners, new partners, rideshare companies, the DC Taxi, Cab Association, lots of different creative ways to be able to get food to those who truly need it. So we'll come into more of the details later, but let me turn it over to Tim right now to give you just a few highlights of this hunger report that we released last week, which will help highlight and show you visually exactly how things are changing, very dynamically in front of us, and how we need to be able to therefore respond to this growing need in our community.
Thanks for that intro, Rada. I've just started to share my screen. Can you let me know if you can see it? Okay, great. So as Rada mentioned, this is the hunger report that we just released last week. And in a nutshell, we look at food insecurity in our region and describe inequities in our community that can affect food insecurity and poverty and disproportionately affect certain populations. We also look at how some of those things are impacted by COVID-19. And you also find a lot of things that Rada just talked about in that report as well. It was built on the Story Maps platform in ArcGIS. And so we have a handful of maps showing some of these inequities in our region, as well as what food insecurity looks like now and possibly into the future because of COVID-19. I won't go through the report right now, the whole report. It's a bit of a long read, but if you do have the time, please take a look at it. I will, though, just go through some highlights. So let's skip to food insecurity and inequity in our region. This section here, our region is a very wealthy, affluent area, but when you look further, you'll see the kind of all of these inequities that exist. So this first map here looks at household income, and you can immediately see the darker the color, the higher the income, median income for that census tract. You can immediately see just some areas are wealthier than others. This is looking at unemployment rate prior to COVID-19. And the areas in DC, Ward 7, Ward 8 were that areas with the highest unemployment rate. And these numbers are even more severe because of COVID-19. This is a map that looks at educational attainment. So what you see with the different colors is the most predominant educational level in that census tract. And these areas in Maryland and some parts of DC, in the dark blue, the predominant education attainment is graduate degree or higher. And kind of see this diagonal split right down the screen where the other half of our region, high school graduate, some college. So educational attainment inequities there. And then this all sort of builds up to life expectancy at birth. And the darker the color, the lower the life expectancy. And you can just see how severe that this one metric is, which a lot of factors contribute to. In the video you saw, just 10 miles away, you can have a huge difference of just 30 years life expectancy, which is pretty crazy. Skipping down to the impacts of COVID-19, we have a map here where you can see the food insecure population by census tract in our region. The darker the red, the higher the food insecure population. And this is what it looks like, an estimate of now before COVID-19. Post COVID-19, with this initial round that has passed, we expect food insecurity to just expand all over across the whole region. So I think I'll stop there for the highlights, but yeah, please, if you have the time, go through the report. Pass it back to you, Maria.
Thanks, Tim. Well, that's a really great segue with the numbers being so staggering into our panel. Tonight, we're joined by Radha and Tim, who you've already met, as well as Chris Bradshaw, who is the executive director and founder of Dreaming Out Loud, which is a local nonprofit focused on rebuilding an economically and environmentally sustainable community-based food system in the DC metro region. Chris and his team have been doing amazing work in the community to meet hunger needs, especially in the wake of the pandemic, and are partnering in really creative ways with local farms, restaurants, and other nonprofits, including the Capital Area Food Bank, as Radha mentioned. We're also joined by Adam LaRose, who's the Director of Advocacy and Public Policy at the Capital Area Food Bank. So with that, I would love to kick it off with a few questions. Just a reminder that if you have a question, feel free to chat me in the chat box and we will get to as many as we can tonight. But to get things started, Radha, I'd love to start with you. And if you shared and touched a little bit on how COVID-19 has been just a game changer for the work that the food bank does. Can you share a little bit more specifically about how you all have pivoted your supply chain and operating model in light of this pandemic and how that's playing out for you all on the day-to-day?
Sure, no, happy to. A few things have changed quite dramatically and quite quickly in March. We had to pivot within a week to address some of these changing circumstances. So the first one was, I mentioned earlier, we used to get about 2/3 of our food donated to us. That dried up very quickly within a week or two in March. And in fact, we had a 75% reduction in the amount of food that was donated to us. So that was the first major pivot where we knew we weren't going to get that same supply and a significant supply, and we had to shift to purchasing more food. So that was one. Second, even as we pivoted to purchasing more food, because of all the supply chain disruptions that were occurring in the country, typically it would take us from purchase to receipt, 8 days, maybe 9 days to be able to get a tractor trailer worth of food, whatever it is, cereal, canned tuna, milk, etc. Very quickly, that became 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I mean, each day, was another week or two in terms of the delays in the supply chain. And so right at the moment where we needed to get more food, we could purchase it, but it was taking 2 to 3 months to be able to be received. So that was another big adjustment that we had to make. I was thankful that we had just switched ERP systems and we had a pretty significant inventory on hand because we hadn't been distributing for about a week the prior month. And so that came in really handy to be able to address the most immediate need while we were waiting for some of the additional food that we had ordered to come in. Another change that occurred is, I think it was mentioned earlier, we do our work through the support of lots of volunteers as well. So we have a great staff, but we have about 20,000 volunteers a year. And I know many of you have come in to support us with, sorting items, packing boxes, etc. And because of the health issues and people not wanting to come out and engage, we saw a drop in the number of volunteers. I mean, we would have hundreds of people a week, and suddenly we were struggling to get 30 people to come in a week. So that was another challenge that we had. And an additional one is that everyone was looking for, boxed food. We usually pride ourselves in saying, hey, come to our free markets. You get to choose what you want, look at the produce, have a conversation about, how to prepare it and what's your favorite recipe for making eggplant and get nutrition advice. And all of that had to be turned on its head where we were like, no conversations. We're going to box all the food. We'll put it in your trunk. We'll, provide it to you if you're walking up. But we had to therefore take that extra step of boxing everything. And so that required even more volunteers and support at a time when, that was dropping. So we had all kinds of operational challenges to address as we attempted to pivot to meet this new need. The other thing that was occurring is, when I talk about 450 partners who we're so privileged to have, many of them are serviced by volunteers themselves. So smaller community organizations that have volunteers who come, many of whom are seniors and who have some time and the passion to be able to support with the distribution of food. And in the early days, as you will all remember, and it is now as well, seniors were most vulnerable. And so immediately we had this drop in the number of partners in our network who were able to distribute food. So we had to do a couple of different things. We looked at the partners that we did have. We added to those who were able to stay open and tried to facilitate them as hubs that could provide more food beyond what they typically would to a wide range of individuals. So we ended up having about 20 hubs in the area who could then provide food to many more clients than we would typically have had them provide to. We also had a number of pop-up pantries. We experimented with those. That had been kind of a holdover from what we did during the federal government shutdown last year. But this pandemic is nothing like the federal government shutdown. And we realized quite quickly the challenges that came up with pop-ups. The media loves pop-ups, but it's a logistical nightmare to do those. And we'd have lines of people, cars waiting, and traffic jams, and we said, no, we don't want to do that anymore. And so we tried a variety of different things. Some worked, some didn't, but really the hub system is a strong one. And then we brought on temporary partners, so those who've never distributed food before, but maybe distributing other social services, and they heard from their clients that their clients needed food, and they were willing to come on, get quickly trained, and we could utilize them as yet another channel. So lots of different approaches, if you will, and we're just thankful that so many different organizations in the community have said, raised their hands and said, count us in, to be able to help you distribute the food. And lastly, I would say, something that Adam will touch on later, but we just addressed and had many more partnerships or stronger partnerships with local government officials, jurisdictions, because they were being asked too, where can we get food? How much food can we get? Can we warehouse some of it and get it out to people? So while we've always had those relationships, they were certainly, ones that we had to count on a lot more to be able to get food out to the community. So those are just some of the ways in which our operations had to very quickly pivot, and now we're looking to scale some of this modified operating effort to be able to get food out. And I'll just say also, finally, Peter started by talking about the fleet of vehicles that we have. We distribute food we do deliveries, but we also have many partners who used to do pickups. But the pickups all stopped, and we needed to ensure safety for staff and volunteers. So we worked with Goodwill. We worked with so many other organizations that had trucks that weren't in use, and they helped us with the fact that we could use those trucks to be able to distribute more food.
Thank you, Radha. Wow, that's I'm struck by the logistics and just sheer magnitude of that operation and how to make that all happen, much less during a pandemic. Tim, let's go to you. I want to hear about, in light of that, how does the Capital Area Food Bank use data to inform its strategy in figuring out all of this in terms of where to focus and how to make this all happen? And how has the pandemic changed that approach to how you use data?
Thanks, Maria. We look at a handful of metrics to evaluate our work and areas we need to focus on. But at a basic level, we often look at food distribution at the county level, compare that to the food need in that county, and see how we're doing there. In addition to county level views, we also slice and dice the data on other variables, for example, by the program type or the type of food product. And we can combine any of those variables together, for example, looking at how a specific program is doing in DC. We also use GIS in our data work, like you saw in the hunger report. And not only does that give us the ability to look at more granular data from a point level and census tract level perspective, but it also provides a different way of looking at and understanding the story behind the data. Actually seeing the data can be a powerful and concise way of assessing the situation. In light of the pandemic, not only did demand for food dramatically increase, but at the same time, many of our food distribution partners were closing. So it became critically important to get an understanding of which partners had capacity to stay open during this time, and have a way to monitor which partners were open or closed on a day-to-day basis. So during that period, we had a team of folks calling partners every day, plugging all that info in one document, and I would take that, make some GIS layers that would get updated daily, so we could understand spatially where our open partners were situated and figure out where the gaps were in our service area. In addition to that, there's a ton of data work happening in determining what types of food goes out, how much of it is going out, and where to, and through which distribution modality. So overall, I think the pandemic has pushed our data approach to new levels of urgency, since the situation on the ground can change so quickly, and we need the data to inform our adjustments or pivots.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I mean, it's a very complex amount of data that you all manage and really use to inform your strategy. We've heard a lot about the different partners you all work with and all the different sort of pieces of the ecosystem that make this food distribution possible. Adam, I wanted to see if you could share a little bit about what the role of the government is in addressing food security and how your approach at the food bank to working with the government has evolved, especially in light of COVID. Can you tell us a little bit about how that piece of that ecosystem works?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me, Maria, and the CAPI team. The way I mean, I could talk about this subject forever, but I think about this in two ways, categorizing it in, the government should address food security and food insecurity in kind of two main buckets, is creatively and holistically. And as far as the creativity goes, I have two examples that I wanted to highlight, both an old program and a new program that kind of, speaks to how the government can respond in real time and address needs. So you have SNAP, the food stamp program, which has been in existence for over 50 years now. There was a New York Times article released late last week, and one of the anti-hunger analysts was quoting saying that, SNAP is one of the most closest things that the United States has to guaranteed income. And it's well situated to respond to, crises in real time. And so, the brilliance of SNAP is that it leans on the efficiencies of the private market. People go into a grocery store, they pick and choose what they want, and they, get it at checkout. And that program has been in existence for a long time. But then you also have CFAP, which is the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, which was essentially implemented by the Department of Agriculture subsequent to the CARES Act being, passed as a part of, various iterations of the stimulus package. And, again, you see in the news that farmers are pouring out thousands of gallons of milk, and meat and cheese is, being spoiled rotten because restaurants are closed, and those distributors don't have, that outlet to supply that method of, food. And so, the government came in and they said, okay, we're going to buy this excess product that is going bad, and we're going to give it to food banks. And that has been such a savior to us as far as inventory and a lot of the supply chains go, that or the supply chain issues go, that Rod and others have talked about. And so I think that we can do it. That we have to be agile in a lot of ways, and that can be tough at a federal level. But then I think it's also important, to think about this holistically in the sense of, one of the key stats that really strikes me in the hunger report that I tell people quite often is that, in 2019, households were surveyed by the Federal Reserve Board, and they basically came to the conclusion that, 40% of households in the United States could not afford a $400 expense or more at any one point in time, which says to me that even before this pandemic, took hold, people were already struggling, right? And, and that is built on, a ton of inequities, a ton of market failures and government failures. And, I just wanted to highlight that we can't necessarily neglect the fact that this is one phase of something that has been in existence for a long time. And then to your question about how our, role and interaction and approach with the government has changed, and Rada spoke to this a little bit, but, we've had to work hand in hand with pretty much every level of government and every jurisdiction that we have worked with throughout our service area, because the need is so high and the obstacles are so peculiar. And so, day to day, I mean, it's county executive's office, it's, county counselors, school board, superintendents, and just hearing what their needs are, hearing how we can help, hearing how we can, provide our services in kind of a COVID way, if you will. And then lastly, I'll just say quickly is that we've really changed the way we advocate, in the sense of, we don't go into these offices and say, hey, we need help with distribution. We want to help you, serve kids with schools being closed. We say that, we want to provide meals, but we also want to make sure that people don't need meals, like we're advocating for anti-poverty program just as much as we are anti-hunger. And, it's just something that is a requisite at this point in time, given the need and, kind of the unfortunate scenario that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. Thanks, Adam. Adam brought up equity, and Chris, I saw you nodding your head. I want to direct this next question to you. Can you tell us a little bit about the connection between food security and equity, and how historical circumstances, the racial wealth gap, and other equity issues have impacted communities of color during COVID? And importantly, what strategies we can think about for an equitable post-COVID recovery? Chris, can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were so many touch points right there within the question. You mentioned the racial wealth gap. And for those who don't know, in this region, the white wealth is 81 times that of Black wealth. And that gap is the distance between security, food security and food insecurity, between education, all of the points that you mapped so well in the hunger report track back to that racial wealth gap, which connects to our history of chattel slavery. And there are a lot of conversations now that have moved into the mainstream regarding bridging those gaps. And one of those conversations is around reparations and the need for bridging that gap in a structural way. We look at our work as a flashlight that can shine light on those inequities, and to be able to have a platform to discuss them. But those solutions go deeper than the food security work and the stopgap measures that we're able to put together as organizations. And they're so historic and so deep that they require a deep structural approach. We talk about the need for almost a Marshall Plan style reparations agenda that is holistic and comprehensive to be able to begin to shift these circumstances as they've developed over more than 400 years. So from our perspective, what we can do and what we do on the ground, and how we can at least begin to turn on the spigot, or at least start to turn the wheels of change, is to build, I would say, opportunities into the challenges. For instance, with the collapse of near collapse of the food system, which you eloquently framed, Adam, we started to think, how could we engage marginalized communities in that active participation in providing emergency food to community members? But we're also in recognition that it requires all of us. So our partnerships were varied and broad, including the Capital Area Food Bank. So I would say the first week out for us consisted of networking and working with Little Sesame, a local restaurant, to pop up outside of Kelly Miller Middle School. And just to backtrack a little bit about Dreaming Out Loud, our mission is to create economic opportunity within marginalized communities by building a healthy, equitable food system. And our base of operations is the farm and food hub at Kelly Miller, which is situated in Ward 7, which was, as I looked at the map, in the dark blue areas and the red areas, we were there. In the lower education levels, the higher poverty, all those negative indicators. But we look at things from an asset-based approach, and the Farm and Food Hub is one of those assets, especially in relation to food. So as we were able to work with Little Sesame, who, as they got down their logistics, were able to pop up, I think, making 150 meals the first week of the shutdown, and we're able to scale up to about 500 meals per week in production. We have close relationships with World Central Kitchen, so we were also able to utilize our networks on the ground to connect their scaling production of meals to community sites, and then eventually also to integrate food entrepreneurs, primarily from Ward 7 and Ward 8, that had gone through our food entrepreneurship program called DREAM, integrate them into meal production as a part of COVID relief. So as of this week, we've made more than 36,000 meals with those food entrepreneurs that are supporting 5 Black woman-owned businesses and about 15 Black workers, and have been able to drive more than $300,000 worth of revenue into those businesses by contracting with World Central Kitchen through their restaurant partnerships to help make emergency meals. So we want to find solutions, or let's call them solutions for now, that integrate people from the community into their own liberation, into their own solutions. And so in working with the Capital Area Food Bank, it has been very helpful. For instance, receiving 50-pound bags of rice, which we're able to get to the food entrepreneurs to help them underwrite their food costs and help us to make more food. We've also received vegetables and produce. We work very closely with the Ward 1 and East of the River mutual aid groups and a few others to get grocery bags. So we're able to reach down into deep within community networks where folks might not have connections, and to be able to utilize those community-based networks to get food to folks. It has also been bittersweet as things have progressed. We've more than doubled in size since the beginning of the pandemic, and it's been great to be able to grow into some of the things that you've wanted to do, but also the circumstances that have precipitated that have been weighted, I would say. So, but one thing that does make you feel better is that we've been able to find folks within the community, from Ivy City, from Lincoln Heights, from Clay Terrace, some of the public housing communities situated near our farm, and really across the district, been able to find folks that have had food experience and to bring them into a different situation that's more sustainable, more holistic, and gives them a different sense of purpose to be able to serve their community. So our Food Hub assistants who were there today, I was at one of our markets where we pop up in front of Kelly Miller Middle School. We're one of the distributors of Produce Plus Direct. So we are now distributing about 2,000 shares of the Black Farm CSA, which we launched on Juneteenth, partially through Produce Plus, which is a DC health program administered by DC Greens that provides free produce for any resident that qualifies for SNAP, Medicaid, Medicare. And so, those folks, those Food Hub assistants and market assistants are on the ground. That market access allows us to source from Black farmers and feature a different Black farmer every week, providing them market access and helping them to survive the pandemic, but also gets community food access as a result of that. So, our approach has been to, use a challenge as an opportunity and pull more people into the system, into working, into making a living. As you mentioned, there's no program better than a job, better than income to help folks at least be able to afford their food, and then have that bigger conversation about addressing the wealth gap and the structural issues of why food apartheid has been the status quo in the district and across the region, and how we can use other opportunities to address these challenges as we watch them spread and grow in the wake of the pandemic.
Thank you, Chris. So it's amazing to hear how much you all have done at Dreaming Out Loud and at the Capital Area Food Bank under these, incredibly unimaginable circumstances. I think I speak for myself, but probably some others on the webinar tonight with this final question that we had planned, and then we'll go to some audience questions, which is, what can we do? What can we, those of us that are joining this webinar and trying to learn and get involved and figure out how to help out, what can we do to help address some of these issues and to help rebuild in our region, knowing just that the challenges are so great? Radha, do you want to speak to that? And then if others want to chime in, feel free.
Sure.
But let's go to you first, Radha.
Yeah, no, happy to. I think there, from what Adam, Tim, and Chris have said, there are lots of different ways to contribute. One is that we have a unique opportunity now to really shape what the recovery and rebuilding of this region looks like. There's many of us as NGOs were kind of, pushing against the door before, saying, look, this is not equitable. We've got to kind of, rebalance things. And, there are lots of other priorities that county officials, government officials, the mayor, depending on where you are, had to address. We are now at a point where the numbers are staggering, not to say they weren't before, but they're even more so now. We're all vested in how we look to recover and rebuild our region, because every single industry has been affected. All of us have been affected, but obviously some more so than others. So I'd say one very important thing is just to become aware, become very aware, whether it's through the hunger report or other kinds of information, to be able to really understand that this region that we call home is not necessarily one, that benefits everyone, that allows for growth for everyone. It does put up many different barriers for individuals, and you are all in a position of great privilege to be able to actually influence that, make sure these conversations occur at all of the platforms that you have access to, all of the working groups that undoubtedly you're all being asked to be on, as we think about how to rebuild. Whether you're in the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, we all have a role to play. And one thing that we're advocating is look around the table whenever, or in this case, look around Zoom whenever you're in a meeting, to say, are there representatives, of the more vulnerable and marginalized groups at the table? Do we have people from Prince George's County or Prince William County or Ward 7 and 8? Pick your region that is relevant. Are they at the table also to be able to represent what their needs are? So I would say that is very, very important. We need more voices to be able to advocate for the rebuilding of a region that we would be proud to call home. So that's number one. I think number two is just for all of us. Many of you I know are at home with kids, not sure what to do. And, we have lots of volunteer opportunities. So, definitely reach out, whether it's to the Capital Area Food Bank. I'm sure Chris has a need, Dreaming Out Loud as well. There are lots of opportunities. We're all thinking of, safe ways to engage people. And we've had lots of practice in that over the last few months. So whether it's helping distribute food, whether it's creating these, thousands of boxes of emergency food that we're putting together for distribution to partners, there's a lot that can be done. We're in fact instituting a third shift, evening shift every day, and a Sunday shift, just because we have millions of pounds of food that need to be boxed before they can be delivered. And the last thing, of course, is what you've already done. And thank you for the financial support that you've provided. But I mentioned how we're purchasing so much more food. Peter will know this as our chair, but typically we spend about $3 million a year purchasing food. We sent to our board a budget that said, you know what, this year it's going to be $16 million to be able to purchase the food that we need to provide to the community. And we know many of our partners need help, grants to be able to acquire that food. And we need to help them do that because we're a big player within this ecosystem as well. It's not enough for us to be able to do what we need to do. We need to provide support for others to do what, is an equally important role in what they need to do. So thank you for what you have done. But we're living with COVID and the economic effects of this for the next 12 months. So if you can, please do continue to support us as well.
Thank you, Radha. And since we are coming up on time, I wanted to just get to one last question. This came from the chat. Question about whether the food bank was able to take advantage of the excess crops that farmers were producing during the crisis. Radha, do you want to speak to that one?
I'm happy to. Adam touched on that with the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. That essentially does take into account the excess harvest that was, that's been available around the country from farmers. And we are, to give you some perspective, we provide now about 5 million, just under 5 million pounds of food a month. About 40% of the food that we distributed last month was through this Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, which is all excess food from U.S. farmers that is provided through distributors to us, and we're providing that out to the community that needs it. And it's a terrific program because it's, boxes of fresh fruits and vegetables, protein, dairy, and so we've been able to take advantage and pass that on to our partners as well.
Thank you. And we had one last question from Clarence Parks. Our church is located on Division Avenue Northeast in the middle of Ward 7, where the data indicated the greatest need. Since we're in the middle of the crisis, what can we do as a community stakeholder to help? We're anxious to get involved. Chris, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, first I'd love to be connected and to know what church you all are located at. I think there's a lot of ways that we can collaborate and that churches have an incredible role to play. One of our partnered producers, Pinky's Eats, is actually based out of a church kitchen, Metropolitan AME at 15th and M. And so, she's been able to use that infrastructure to support the community. We also help distribute meals with First Baptist Church of Deanwood. So, churches as a natural gathering point for folks. I know that some folks have gone to virtual services, but the church has the ability to say, if you're a CSA site for the Black Farm CSA, it could be a pickup point for that. Folks could help to potentially subsidize shares or even meals for community members who don't have the means to afford food. There's a lot of different ways that we can partner, and churches have a prominent role, even from disseminating information to church members about existing programs is an incredible value. So whether that's as a pickup point, as a supporting infrastructure, if you have fridges or anything like that that can support the food infrastructure and food security, there's multiple ways that the faith community can plug in.
Thank you, Chris. And Clarence provided contact info, so I will make sure that gets to you in an email so you have it. Well, we are at time. I want to thank everyone so much for joining tonight. And I will just share my screen here with some contact information. First, a big thank you to our panelists. Thank you guys so much. It was wonderful to hear your perspectives. I think we could probably have a whole college course on this topic and hear more from you. So an hour is not nearly enough time, but we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. A big thank you to the Yale Club of DC for hosting this event. And importantly, thank you to all of you who joined. We really hope that you learned something and that you're inspired to join this community effort, and that you found it interesting and that it will inform your thinking in the future. As our panelists shared, a great place to start is by thinking of ways you can get involved. If you're interested in checking out the fundraiser that we mentioned, you can feel free to check out the link here on the slide. We'd love to get to our $15,000 goal, as Peter mentioned. That equates to more than 37,000 meals for people who need them. So please consider checking that out. And if you're interested in getting involved in any volunteering, community service event planning or activities with the Yale Club, feel free to shoot me an email. My email address is up as well. With that, I just really want to thank everyone again for joining, and I hope you all have a great night. Take care.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Maria. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.